Hey everybody.
Hello.
What's
Good
up?
evening.
Good evening to you too, Mohammed. Making the cool kids co-hosts out here. Couple of things. Well, first and foremost, we'll just kind of wait a couple minutes to get everybody in. And I believe Geraldina might be coming in to do to have someone speak to us today. Let me just double check here.
Nothing.
But
Jolly, jolly, nothing.
in the meantime, we'll start in 7 minutes. Oh, were you gonna say something? I'll take that as a no. All right. See y'all in a little bit. Start the recording. Let's get started. Okay, so today we're gonna go over an intro to React.js and end with a little bit of a lesson there. But first, I just wanted to give the mic to Geraldina to just kind of talk to y'all about some stuff as well as I don't know, is the guest speaker coming today, Geraldina?
He said 6:30, but
Okay.
I think he might be running a little bit late.
Okay, no worries. All right, so I guess what I can do is start with a little bit of what I want to chat about before we like go through the lesson. So first and foremost, understandably, like the we I would like y'all to start thinking about like your capstone and kind of like the groups that you would be working with on your capstone. One of the reasons for this is like our program is sadly coming to an end. We have about 4 more Saturdays left, so not a lot of time, but what I'm gonna do is actually compress as much as I can, sharing that with y'all, but also I want y'all to have like a project that y'all will be excited to kind of work on, like to share and present from the program. So what we'll be doing a lot of the Saturdays is like mixture of labs, but also working on your capstones. But one other thing I did want to share is from our little example from Saturday. I want to share y'all with y'all the progress we have here. So if we take a look at PPR deploying day one, what's really cool is we do have a couple of our students here that are just visible, and each one will kind of point to either a 404 or not. Basically, what it should be is your portfolio. So make sure that that is there. But one of the things I did want to point out is, let's see, well, none of y'all. All right, well,
They both say Blanca.
huh?
Both of the images say Blanca.
Yeah, yeah, which is odd. Oh, that's what's going on. So basically, I'll have to like make sure y'all actually replace the actual link even on your screenshot with where you're going. But the idea is it's really cool is bam, you got a little um we have a little bit of a class roster now.
Nice.
Now, what I want to point out to y'all is if this is actually one of the capstone projects you'd be interested in doing, I would recommend y'all coming together and actually working on this as possibly one of the capstone projects. This is something that actually Geraldina really wanted for the students as well. And what could be really cool about this is one, it's a more front end project if y'all are kind of more excited about the front end, but also it's something that LaGuardia actually needs. So it's something that you can kind of point to on your resume and say like, hey, I built this thing that is currently being used in LaGuardia. So I'm not gonna sell y'all on this anymore, but if this is something that you're interested in, maybe it might be worth actually grabbing your team together and working on this as the capstone. Again, I would recommend chatting with the cohort one as well. Maybe there's a couple of students there that might be interested in working with y'all on this, but this is a really cool way to kind of, make a capstone that actually makes a difference in the world. So keep that in mind.
Because Vatsio, how big will the teams be, and how can students, if they have an idea for a project, or how can they submit an idea, or how does that process go?
Yeah, great question, Geraldina. So the teams should be no bigger than four, but no smaller than two. So you at least need to have more than one person on your team. And the idea, what we will actually be sharing is you'll have like an idea of like really four kind of projects, so we can kind of scope your vision and help you basically build out what you can in basically 4 weeks. It will be an e-commerce site, a blog site, and there are two others not including this capstone idea here as well. So um, when you have an idea that you want to float by us, just kind of like share it with either me or anyone on the TA side. And we can kind of like guide you on whether that's a good idea or not, and something that can be achievable in basically the 4 weeks that we have left. Any questions on the capstone before we kind of do a little bit of the lesson before the guest speaker comes through? Any ideas on a capstone? No one? No one's excited to make something that they want to, that like, hey, this is the only time you'll get like free reign to build something that you actually want to build. So take advantage of it.
And if you don't choose a partner, or you don't know, you haven't met other people in the cohort yet, will you get a partner assigned?
I'm going to leave it up to them for now, but if I see someone like really working alone type stuff, then you will have to be like grouped together with a partner. But I believe in y'all and the ability of actually communicating with your student, with your fellow students to actually make make something. Okay. But long story short, what you really need to be starting to think about is kind of like coming together, grouping, like basically just trying to come up with the groups that you want to work with together on your projects. So, um, if you'd like, basically, hey Lewis, do you still have your old project from like your previous cohort back in the day?
Like see if I can pull it up.
Okay. Um, And another thing I did want to kind of like have Lewis do before we start is we kind of talked about how, when doing labs and stuff like that, you should not be using AI. But once we get into capstone land, the plan is you should have like basically your core understanding of like your programming concepts and how to kind of build your application. So that's where you'll start to be allowed to kind of be like go full range with AI, but I want you to kind of use AI the right way, not build me this whole app, but basically there are these small little key pieces that I want you to build it out that way, so you're actually more of this manager than an actual person using Spark Notes, if y'all remember Spark Notes back in the day. um I'm gonna let Luis grab basically his old example, but in the meantime, I do see that a couple of y'all have pull requests still open. Let's see. There's still 6 pull requests that are open on this project. So again, remember what we're supposed to be doing with this is pairing together to actually help each other review your lessons for this portfolio page. And once it's merged in, you'll actually see the updates on the actual site here. So um, if you didn't, I don't see a great many of y'all here. So if you are still waiting for a pull request to be merged in, you should be talking with your fellow students to actually do that. And as well, you should actually be kind of talking with your fellow students to actually group together and actually work on your project. So again, we'll keep the scope of this project a little smaller, our capstone a little smaller, just because we have less time than we would like for this, but that's kind of the reason why you have an option of like 4 real paths to go on. But from the last cohort who had like 4 paths, 4 ideas to really branch off from, they made a lot of really cool stuff. So I'll show, Luis will show you an example, and also kind of share a little bit about his experience using AI the right way, just so you can kind of get a better understanding of that. And then we'll kind of go into our lesson. Geraldina will more than likely come back with the guest speaker if they're coming, but if not, we'll just kind of go through our lesson there. Lewis, if you need a little bit more time, I can kind of like start the lesson, but no
Yeah,
pressure.
you can start the lesson. I'm trying to find the old project just to make
Okay.
sure.
We'll take a brief intermission partway through the lesson to actually do a little bit more of the cool projects and AI stuff. Okay, so today we'll be learning about React JS. This is a um, one of the modern web frameworks that are really popular currently in modern in the web right now. A lot of what you've probably experienced on the web is built through this JavaScript UI library, and we'll get into the concept of why this is more of a UI library more than like React.js. It will be like a framework, but what React is more of this kind of UI library. We'll kind of go into what the difference is and why that is a little later. But um, if you've used Reddit, if you've used Netflix, if you have used Facebook or Instagram, because Facebook is for dinosaurs apparently now. You have experienced React.js in production. So it runs a lot of the modern web frameworks that we like, the modern web apps that we all know and love. And I'm really excited to have y'all kind of understand it because um, back in the day, I kind of like used the old jQuery stuff to kind of build my sites. And when I switched to React, it kind of it changed the game for me a little bit. So let's kind of talk about why that is. So what is React? It's basically um, a JavaScript for like building user interfaces. This was built by Facebook back when Facebook was Facebook, not Meta, but it's a open source building user interface library that's built by Meta. It's What's interesting about it is it's a declarative kind of like framework library, which basically means the state of the application is determined by like what the user interface looks like instead of just kind of like this imperative kind of like um, micromanaging type like approach. I'll kind of show you an example of that a little later. But what's also cool is this framework is composable. It's you build out what you do is you actually build out um, little like building blocks, and then you put them together to kind of make your application into this like great, like epic thing like Netflix or whatever. What that means basically is you can build a little component that's really just for like a button, a button component, where a lot of the logic that usually kind of has the same behavior of like a typical button you'd put in there, but then you can kind of use that same composable component anywhere on your page. So um, something that's maybe a little bit easier to think about is, let's say you have, because this site is built with React here. Let's say if you have um, a navigation bar, um, and you don't want to rebuild this navigation bar everywhere. You can set this up like a component. You set this up as a component, and basically throughout the page, you only have to you just reuse that same component over and over again. So you're able to kind of um, keep your app composable, modular, and if there is ever an issue, basically you know where to kind of go into to debug. So if there's an issue on the header navigation bar, I know I just really need to start debugging in the navigation component over having to kind of like debug through the whole monolithic app there. So um back in the day, if you kind of built something out with a traditional, just straight up JavaScript, or basically traditional like other frameworks, you would basically try, you'd fix some kind of button that's on your navigation bar, and it could possibly break the shopping cart app on your e-commerce site. And with this kind of idea of these things, these components being little Lego blocks, you now have the ability to kind of just like isolate your logic and functionality through little composable Lego blocks. And a little bit of why that is important. Like, let's think through, let's kind of go back to this whole concept of declarative over like, our traditional route of like just kind of imperative programming. What we used to do was kind of like more in the lines of micromanaging kind of programming with imperative programming. And what that kind of looks like is a little bit here, like basically what we did when we were kind of like playing around with, let's say we have like this little array here, and we online, well, we don't have lines here, but let's say we have this little um array here called fruits, and we want to kind of use our for each. You remember for each, where we pass in a callback function to actually like, like that will be called on each element in our array when we loop through. Um, the old way we can kind of handle basically, like adding elements to a DOM and stuff like that is by like imperatively grabbing the document, getting the element by ID, and then changing the inner HTML one at a time. This is very kind of like micromanagey, while declarative programming, which is the way React kind of works, is we build out the states of our UI, and then based off of our logic, we change our UI state based off of what our logic entails. So the idea is like, instead of kind of directly micromanaging and saying, hey, go into this div, change this thing here, we are basically saying, hey, we have this concept of our user interface on our web browser, and if a person presses a button, um, the state of this UI should change based off of that. So it's a little interesting way of kind of thinking through programming, but the real thing is like, why would we do that? Like it's a whole different way of thinking. It's a little weird. It's for me, it threw me for a loop back in the day, but the idea is really like why we kind of like go through this whole new way of thinking and React is one, it's speed. React is going to be super fast. You'll see why in a little bit. But two, this declarative approach does kind of make it our code easier to read, instead of kind of like um micromanaging in the idea of basically like, hey, we're checking for every character that someone kind of like writes on a paper. We're kind of like, let's say we're more of like a manager at a job and saying like, this is how the final research report should look like. Go forth and actually make sure just like it's in this format, but like like I'm not gonna like be micromanaging you to kind of like finish it off. And then of course this modular reusability, as I mentioned, makes it easier to kind of reuse stuff as well as fix issues in your code. And one of the coolest parts about it is, as I mentioned, React is this kind of UI library, like React.js is like the framework, yada, yada, yada. It's a JavaScript framework there. But with React, understanding React, you can take that same UI library and build out iOS apps and Android apps with a sister technology called React Native, all the way to desktop apps, kind of like with Windows 10. Um, so React is kind of really powerful in that sense there. So two things. What we're going to do right now, we're going to take that small little intermission, as I mentioned. Um, uh that this whole concept of like you kind of learn this cool little JavaScript library. You could basically build out mobile apps all the way to iOS. No, sorry, mobile is in iOS and Android all the way to desktop apps is cool, but of course there are some limitations. Luis, I do want you to kind of chime in a little bit about like how at your startup you actually built out your initial app using React Native, but then you ended up switching back. So like there are some drawbacks and stuff like that to that. But also, what I want to do is have Luis kind of like take a small little breather, like give us a small little breather so you can kind of see what a capstone project can look like from this program here. So Luis, I think you chose the path of an e-commerce site, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
So I actually still have my presentation and the website. The
All right,
images are
yo, do
just
both.
messed up.
All right,
Yeah,
so
it's no
take it
problem.
away.
I'll
Um,
share.
Commercial break.
Alrighty. So what me and my cohort did, or our group specifically, we did a e-commerce website. We called it Otaku Vault. So we wanted to find the cheapest way to buy anything anime related. So we grabbed like the 50 most popular websites to buy anything anime related, from manga, action figures to clothing to anything you can really find that's anime related, and we'll vet for the product that you're looking for and make it so you will find the cheapest option always. So whatever's on the site is always going to be the cheapest option for that product. But let me present it. Mind you, you don't have to do this crazy presentation. I was more of a marketing finance guy. So like why we did this, the purpose of it, like we did a whole presentation on like why we want to do it. This is our team. We pretty much stuck to like what we do in our current jobs, even though like we ended up being more full stack. Um, Tao is also working with me here at Agentic Health, so it's just another thing to show that people. I still kind of work with the same people. I still hang out with Ryan to talk about other stuff. So definitely hang out with the same groups. Again, what are the issues we're trying to solve? Many companies overcharge for overseas products, no testing of quality products, and no hub to get everything you need. And then like what we actually want is to like purchase a bunch of anime stuff. These are just like figures that we thought we started like doing some data analysis on stuff, so you can see like what the cost is differential. Again, you guys don't have to do this crazy of a presentation, but this is just like how we did it. and then like what we use. And you're gonna need to like address all of these during your capstone. Is like, why do you choose the topic you build? What are the resources you use to build it? What are you discussing on like building those products? Why did you want to build the product? Think of it like you're pitching like a startup, like you're building a product. And here's the actually best advice when you're doing your capstone: pick something that you're actually passionate about. Like we were all just kind of nerds that wanted to buy a bunch of anime stuff, so that's what we ended up going with. But like, don't pick a topic that you're gonna later not be able to talk about. Pick a topic that you actually will remember and be able to talk about at any time. Because when you go through interviews, that's gonna be the thing that's gonna be brought up, and that's the thing you're gonna remember always because it's something you wanted. Here's some of the code that we did. So mine ended up like we swapped our backend because we needed to do an API crawler, and there's no like official crawl like APIs for these websites. They don't want us to do this. So we built an API crawler to kind of do this, and we did it in Python. And then like what we thought would be like future points of like building out that product, what we would do, and like that's pretty much it. And then I'll show you the website. So the links are all dead because we didn't build like a maintainable like version of keep updating this. Now I'll do this even better, but that's just being now overly zealous. But this is the same website you guys saw. You can see the figures. It goes through them. It goes
I think
through a
I
bunch of
have that
them.
Kakashi toy.
Again, the links are dead for the images, but like it's due to like pretty much us not maintaining it. But that's pretty much the website. And I think we also did like exclusives, new arrivals, and like bestsellers. Like based off data, we gather like when people purchase stuff, we'll be able to determine all these newer factors. Again, I think most of the time you'll like if you're doing an e-commerce one, it's pretty simple. But I definitely think that other people had more creative projects. So definitely like be don't be afraid to think outside the box is the idea of it. A lot of times it's like we or at least our group decided on based off like what we all felt was something we can all put in and contribute. Other groups did it based off we wanted to. I believe one group did the anti-cheat, the cheating on everything type of thing, like the Cluely style, and then another one did about like an evil model and a game dev style. So like different people did different groups of things. So again, don't be afraid to do like what you guys believe as a group would be a better decision. And don't be afraid to go outside of like what you already know. Like obviously we were like Tao was very more familiar with React than I was, but I was more familiar with backend, and I didn't even use Node. I had to use Python for certain things. So like if you know something, don't be afraid to use it. And this is a good way to segue into like the AI usage. I'll close this off. So here's really the advice on somebody like I've been working with AI using it for the last like year of my time working at a company. Um, you're only as good as what the tool is going to give you. So if you can't read what the code is already doing, then you probably won't know how to fix it when it breaks. And a lot of people are realizing that like, yes, code right now is super cheap. You can make code of anything. The real problem is getting the right question to ask to get the output you want, getting the more appropriate answers to like be able to answer the questions that need to be answered. And the way I use a lot of AI is I would say my job is to read what people are doing and figure out stuff that I wasn't involved with to be able to ask other people. Now it can be more of like, okay, he entered this code. I got the GitHub, read the do the get logs, read his thing, and have the AI summarize what has been done, so I know what the next steps are from there. And you won't get to this level of understanding without like going through the grind of just getting things wrong. Like it's okay to get things wrong. What AI is doing is making people feel that getting stuff wrong is not good because you want it to work. But get it In computer science, the answer isn't just to get it to work. You need it to be efficient. It's like a leak code question. You can get an answer. It's not the optimal answer, but it's an answer. But in a company, they don't want an answer. They want the optimal answer. So you have to figure out what questions you need to ask to better determine that. And in your project, you're gonna realize it. Like you're gonna ask it to do something, and you might get an answer, but it's not the way you want it. It will never be the way you think of it in your head. So you have to now think of a way to ask the question in a better way. You just start learning it from there. You just realize that like the way you're asking the question is not correct. You're maybe not using a verbiage that you're thinking that is standard in industry. Because like these models are built off standard industry. People will say certain ways of certain things and they'll just understand it. And if the more you try to like change that, it's not gonna work. You're just gonna have to start learning what those standards are and you'll start picking it up slowly. So I'm never opposed for people to use AI, but if you're trying to just answer the question, then it defeats the purpose of using AI. It's like everyone's talking about like web dev and software engineering. People are going out of business, are like the mass exited of engineers. No one wants to be an engineer anymore. People, if our job was just to build a website, trust me, works. All these companies already existed to build website. WordPress has existed longer than I was born. People could build websites all day long. It's not about like just building the website. It's about answering more important questions. And that ends up being like your role. The job of an engineer now is more of asking more deep questions than it is to like just code. I'll say like maybe 20 to 10% of my job is like coding. Most of the time is debugging and understanding what the root causes and like what better questions to understand to answer and resolve the issues that we're having. So I think that's pretty much what I'll say for like most of the AI industry and like most of the AI stuff that you guys will be doing. Like, don't be afraid to use it, but understand like the more important thing is understanding what the AI is giving you and knowing what is right and wrong. Like, you won't know it until you do it. So might as well start now where it's not going to hurt you. When if you're in a company trying to learn this, trust me, it's going to hurt. Especially, listen, if you have someone like me, I don't want my code to be messed up. So you'll get a talking with me every time.
Yeah, and thank you, Luis, for that. Really great one project, and also great advice on utilizing AI the right way. So, this is primarily a lot of the reason why there was this idea of kind of like having y'all work through your problems without kind of like AI, like the labs and stuff like that without AI first. So you kind of can struggle, understand how to kind of like fundamentally like build out like, your and like think through your problems in a programmatic way. So when you're able to kind of like basically, like go to your capstone and build out your full project, you can utilize AI with basically understanding programmatic thinking. So the idea is, honestly, a lot of times AI can be considered that over what is it? The over eager uh like intern engineer. But if you guide your AI agent the right way, you can go from like basically analyzing the code from things like basically like most AI agents like analyze like all of the code from GitHub that was publicly accessible and kind of understands these patterns, as Lewis said. And if you ask it the right way, like you are a senior engineer building out this thing over here, I have this one particular problem that I'm trying to solve in this one part, it kind of like goes through with the eyes of like a senior engineer understanding how to solve this in a scalable way, not like an over eager intern. So keep that in mind. I would still recommend struggling for the labs, but in your capstone, take what you've learned from these labs, and then basically you can kind of like be that manager using your AI to kind of help you build out the small pieces there. What you really should be doing is being more of this kind of like software architect more than like just like coding out and just building out what you want. So that's what I challenge you to kind of like really think through when you're building out your capstone project. there is this really interesting paradigm that's happening in software where we have lost junior engineers and we've lost senior engineers, and there's just this weird kind of like timeline that like basically goes from software engineer to software architect, and like AI has kind of like turned the trajectory of your tech career into that. So what we're trying to get you to kind of be is, like understand your stuff enough to be like a software engineer at this point, and then understand the architectural decisions and scalability stuff that you would actually want to like you'd understand to actually make scalable software to kind of turn you into that senior architect so you can kind of utilize AI agents the right way to actually like build your tools out and your software out. So that's AI in a nutshell. There's way more to learn. Um, Again, I know a lot of y'all are probably using ChatGPT for it. There are so many other agents that are significantly better, like Claude and oh, screw it, it's just Claude at this point. No, I'm kidding. But like basically the idea is you're um like you would
Tom,
you would kind of like understand the like how these AI agents code differently based off of like like your past project and stuff like that. So yeah. Okay. So
the 400 alignment, the
um
golden plans from Plan June to actually work.
Okay.
oh wait, Luis, you
Right.
got something else to say? Oh,
DTF.
All right.
cool. All right, cool. So commercial break is over. Let's get back to the lesson. But beforehand, do y'all have any questions on anything we just talked about? Whether it be like the right way to use AI, your capstone projects, all the way to what the hell is a React? Okay, nothing? All right. Let's get back to the lesson then. Don't mind that schedule. That's why I'd be tired all the time. Okay, so yes, React gives you the ability to kind of like, you write your UI one way, and then you basically can build it out for other platforms. So, like, I'll show y'all an example of how that look like, a traditional thing that we do in React would actually kind of translate to a mobile device in a little bit. Okay. Another benefit of React.js is the community. Like, as I mentioned, React has kind of like for now has won the framework wars. Like frameworks rise and fall a lot of times. So, but right now React is one of the top tier frameworks that most companies use. So it has a large community backing. So if you have an issue, you can probably find it on like how to solve that via, like Googling it all the way to using something ancient like Stack Overflow. Um, Again, a ton of support from Meta, Facebook, and other companies and engineers because this is an open source framework, which basically means um, the whole community can contribute to this, and then contributing to this actually just makes it better and better while you're just benefiting off of like like this open source basically means community driven kind of development, and the idea is like this is really cool because basically everyone was like, hey, like this is technically free to use, and you can kind of build your software the right way with this open source tool. And there's always smart people updating and fixing React every day. You'll actually see how these slides are like has a different way of kind of using React compared to what we currently use because of the fact that like React is always kind of updating. Every 2 years it's slightly different. Okay, so first things first, I want to kind of show you like what scaffolding a React app used to look like. We'll kind of go into how it looks now, but if we take a look at this structure here, this is basically, our HTML document where we're used to this. We understand what this kind of looks like. We have our title, which is just hello world. This is kind of like our baby's first React app. But as you can see, we are including three different like script packages here. First is React 15. We'll be using something closer to React 19 now. So as I mentioned, React updates continuously. And we are using React. We would actually grab React DOM, which basically means we're actually using the React that we need to manipulate the DOM. We all know what the DOM is, so we know that this is actually being used for the web. And then we also need this other library called Babel, which kind of like transpiles our code into something that's more readable for the browser. So, what we're going to be building is like, using like this weird extra layer of a mixture of HTML and JavaScript called JSX, all of this stuff that feels really weird and unique. But Babel just kind of takes our code and just compiles it back down to JavaScript that's readable for the browser. And if we kind of take a look here, what's kind of interesting about React, let's kind of take a look at the body here. As you can see, we have this div of an ID of container. And then we have this little script container here that's text/Babel, the library that I just kind of mentioned there. We have a variable called hello world. And what we have is kind of like this React calling this thing called create class, which basically is React's way of saying like, hey, I'm creating a component, and it's saying render hello world. Basically, it's a function that returns the div of hello world, and that's basically React just rendering hello world to the page. The component will actually basically control all of the functionality of like that whole hello world div. And then if we take a look at the line right before the end of our script tag here, we'll see that we're using this thing called React DOM.render, which basically says, hey, take that component, and I want you to replace get element by ID, and then basically render it on that container div that we have all the way up here. So when you really think about it, what's cool is like React is just basically saying, hey, that container here, I'm going to grab that and then just render all of the React stuff that we are, we've been kind of like, we're going to build out. So that's what React is really doing under the hood. But something that's a little interesting is, as you can see, like there's just a lot here, there's like a lot of kind of setup there, there's a lot of weird like variables, grabbing a div container, swapping it out, like what's up with that? Like the way we structure that hello world and JSX, we'll go into what JSX is, but this this looks a lot, mom, come pick me up, I'm scared. There's a lot going on here. But one thing I want to point out is, this is how we had to handle kind of scaffolding and getting React up and running in the old days. What's beautiful now is we have basically something a little easier to kind of handle that. So I'll get into that a little later, but let's actually go into what the heck is happening here first, and then I'll just kind of go into a little bit more of what's happening. So remember, as you saw here, we have this whole React, for the variable hello world, we have this whole concept of React.create class. What that's doing is basically saying, hey, React wants to create a component. What's a component? More to come on that, but like the TLDR of it is basically it's one of those Lego blocks I've kind of mentioned here. A component is the composable kind of building block pieces of code that you would actually use in React to kind of put your whole web app together. So it starts with like these components. There are components in components. You stack components on. You think of it a lot like Legos. You'd need 100, you needed 1,000 piece Lego set to actually build out, like I got the Simpsons house over here from that's my Lego set, but it's thousands of pieces. Picture each of those little pieces as like, a little component that you're stacking together, but then when you finish it, it becomes the Simpsons house. So React component. Think of it as that little Lego block with a little piece of code that you can reuse over and over again, depending on where you need it to be. The render function, which is now kind of like more of a return function. I'll show you how that looks now. This is kind of like the minimal property needed to define like what is going to be rendered and passed in like the create React class, the component. Basically, every component will have a return / render function. And what that is basically what will be presented to the browser, what would be presented to the browser in this component. So if we take a look back here, we have this render function right under our hello world that basically has a function that returns hello world in a div. That's really what this whole component's doing. It's just saying hello world in a div and putting that on the browser. But that's basically what, what our render function does. It just basically presents the HTML JSX code that we will actually be sharing there. So something that's a little interesting is, if you remember from your portfolio page all the way to the other labs that we've done, we've kind of never had JavaScript really in our HTML page. It was always like JavaScript was in a separate file that we imported. CSS was in a separate file that was imported. And now, if you see here, this whole concept of JavaScript and HTML in our HTML is like that whole paradigm of like keeping it separate is thrown away here. This looks a little weird and intimidating, but this is kind of one of the paradigms that you have to kind of like rethink in React land. What I want you to kind of understand is a lot of this is not actual HTML. It's something similar to HTML called JSX. More to come on JSX, but the idea is like really like JSX, you can think of it very similar to like Spanglish. The idea is it's a little bit of HTML, it's a little bit of JavaScript put together to actually make your page more dynamic. You can kind of run JavaScript within your page, and that's kind of, like that gives you the ability to kind of like dynamically have UIs change based off of like your JavaScript right in your HTML there. Okay, so let's get set up with ES6. Back in the day, as I mentioned, there's a lot of this whole intimidating setup of like your React components. What was kind of cool is we have this whole concept of create React app. But what I'm actually gonna mention is like what's cool is we have something even better now. And I know y'all are kind of always like saying like, oh, this is the worst time to be a software engineer. It's so hard to like, like get employment. But like there are all these tools that have basically been created because of like, developers from before. So you have all of these amazing new tools to kind of make creating React apps, like basically creating components, styling components just way easier. So I'm going to first share this on our Slack here, but Vite is basically this build tool that allows you to build out leaner modern web projects. And Vite is this industry standard for like building out your frameworks. And this gives you a really easy way to just kind of, like start up your React app and just kind of get you straight into coding like in 0 to 30 seconds over taking like almost 20 minutes to 40 minutes to just kind of, get your stuff up and running to render hello world to the page using React. So first, let me share this with y'all in our cohort. So this is Vite. Again, really great resource to utilize with your React app. But what I want to show you is kind of how you can use this to scaffold your first React app. So I am going to go to our terminal here. What I want to do is make sure that this is sitting somewhere that you don't have to worry about. So I'm actually gonna, all right, so let's go back to our little array lab here. I'm going to get out of the array lab because you don't want to be making a project in another project here. So let's get out of here, JS, out of here. Let's go into React. And I'm going to go into, well, we can do it here. Okay, so what I want to do is actually have a, oh yeah, example intro here. Intro here. Yeah, so we have we have basically a my first React app. This was me showing the last class. I'm going to show you how I would do this again. So first things first, I would actually run this same command that we have here from the example here, where it's npm create vite at latest. And let me show you the magic that happens when you run this command. So first and foremost, like what you're gonna do is like you're gonna like install Vite using npm install and stuff like that in your groups. But for now, let me just kind of like walk you through what's happening here. So I'm gonna run npm, go back, create Vite at latest, and let's see what happens. Bam. So basically, what's kind of cool is it's like it'll prompt you with a bunch of stuff that you want. So, like, what is the project name that you want? So, I'm gonna say, LAGCC class dash two, like lesson. That's going to be the name of my project. So I hit enter, bam. Now it's going to be like, yo, select your framework. So what's kind of cool about this is you can kind of see all of the frameworks that are kind of you can build out, but all of them you can choose vanilla, which is basically just normal JavaScript. But as I mentioned before, we're going to use React. So what's cool is you navigate down to React, you hit enter here, bam. And what's awesome next is it allows you to basically say, hey, what variant of React do you want? Do you want to build this with TypeScript? Do you want to build this with JavaScript? Do you want to use like RSC? Do you want to use React Router, like TAN router? These are all extra stuff we'll talk about later, but right now I just want a simple React with JavaScript app here. So I'm going to hit enter there. And it'll say, hey, you want me to run npm run, install and just start the server now? Heck, why not? So as I mentioned before, in the past, getting this all up and running took damn near 40 minutes before. Now, within about that was like a minute, so it wasn't 30 seconds, but within a couple of seconds, we now have our Vite app up and running. And if we just click on this here, copy, we go straight to our little app here. bam, our we have like the boilerplate of a React app just up and running right now, which is pretty cool. We close this. I'm gonna just kind of so I exited the build process there. I'm gonna like run ls, and if you see, we now have a folder here called L, LaGuardia dash class dash two dash lesson. So one gotcha that always is a little silly is like I always wish Vite would just kind of like change your directory and put you right into the actual repo that you've created. It doesn't. It just runs the server. So I'm actually gonna cd into our um, web app that we just made. I'm going to run code, open it up, and if we see, bam, right here, we now have, get that out of my face, Copilot. We can now see we have our lovely React app built out here. So inside of our source folder, you'll see that, let me make this a little bigger for you. Inside of our source folder, you'll see that we have a bunch of the stuff that makes our React app like, a living, breathing app here. So what I do want to point out is, let me show you how like this whole structure of like our React app here that's like, hold me, I'm scared over here, has changed and basically is now scaffolded to kind of just have you start coding. So if we take a look at our index.html, what we have here is basically a very basic, like HTML document. We have our title here, which is like the name of our app. We have this div with the ID of root. Keep that in mind. And then we also have this script that basically takes us to main.jsx. So again, this looks pretty similar to what we have here, but let's actually take a look and see what happens in main.jsx. So I just went into main.jsx right now. And if you see, you can kind of disregard the whole strict mode and all that stuff. It's really just kind of a little bit of boilerplate stuff. But what I want to show you is, instead of us kind of like, as you can see here, hey, take the component and this div and then render it on there. We have this new little function called create root, where we still take the DOM element that we want. So basically it's root, which was in HTML here. On line 10, we have root. So it's saying on root, render in strict mode, again, boilerplate stuff, render our app. Okay. Bam. So what's interesting is like, all right, what the heck is an app? Let's take a look here. So I'm going to go into our app JSX here because that's where our app is coming from. And if you take a look here, this is kind of our boilerplate start to our React app here. So if we go down here, you see this thing here that we have is kind of what we have going on here. And what I like to do is to just kind of show you is like, let's start removing stuff because we don't necessarily need all of this boilerplate nonsense just yet. It's just really there to kind of show you, hey, this is what we can do here. So if I were to remove those things there, bam. Oh yeah, I forgot the server's not running. Remember, because I basically changed the server. I exited our little server here to go into the project. One thing I do want to show you is how you can kind of always take a look at how to run run your React server. So a lot of the scripting rules are held inside of our package JSON here. And if we take a look here, we have kind of like the name of our repo, the name of our project, is it private, the versions, so on and so forth. But what I want to kind of point out is our scripts here. So we have the script of dev, we have the script of build, lint, preview, so on and so forth. How do we kind of run a preview of our server, the dev server? We just run this command called dev, And this is kind of how we would do this in our terminal. We'd run npm run dev. If we hit that command right there, it will run the same server that we saw at the beginning. If you take a look at the browser now, reload, you will see that we've actually have our little React app running. I removed the little header over there, as you can see. Let's actually go back. I'll put it back in just to show you how it looked before. Bam. We have this little cool little logo here. We don't need that nonsense right now. You're gonna do whatever. You're gonna make your own logos and your own apps one day. So let's actually remove all of like this div here. I'm gonna say let's actually remove everything here so we can kind of show you what the heck's happening here. So I'm going to get all of this crap out of here because remember, this is just the boilerplate stuff here. And I want to actually remove the CSS here, as well as in our main here. We have like some extra CSS that's like on the root here. I want to remove that right now. So I'm just going to comment that out. We take a look now, we have a blank page. And if we were to do something like in our example here from our initial Hello World app, we just want to create the div of Hello World. Let's do that. Bam. I'm going to go into our app, which is kind of like our first root component. And remember, like in React, you always have to kind of return something within a div or like a div-like structure. So you have this little empty brackets with a slash bracket here, and inside of there, that's where you kind of write your JSX code to actually build something out. So I'm going to just have a div. I swear, like I just do dev no matter what I say. Div, get rid of that over there. And if I write hello world here, save. So we have basically nothing happening here. Let's even remove this. We have nothing happening here except for a div that says hello world. So if we kind of take a look back here, our boilerplate React app, bam, we have our little hello world kind of here after our scaffolding is done there. So this is kind of the boilerplate of how we would build a React app. And as you can see, it kind of just starts it from scratch. And it even gives you almost too much stuff to even play around with. But you know, what's cool is, you know, like you can kind of go from zero to a working React app in a couple of yes or no prompts from Vite. So back in the day, we had to do create React app and do all of that stuff. Basically, there was actually even more, you know, like there were a couple of extra things you had to do. As you can see now, is a way easier process to just get up and running with React. Right. Okay, so again, we kind of did this example here where basically we've created a component that just says hello world. And what's interesting is, as you can see, like the way React kind of was written back, you know, in React 15, this still works, but as you can see, the paradigm is a little different now. So instead of us having like this whole class hello world which extends component, and we have a render of, you know, like hello world from that, and then we have like the app that extends to like, you know, return hello world. We now just have like a function of app that returns the JSX that we want to just kind of write inside of our page there. This is kind of like, as we mentioned before, you know, like React has a bunch of smart people kind of like working on the app, working on the framework. This is basically the paradigm that they kind of like changed the whole like aspect of React to kind of like flow better. And this is kind of how React is written now. So cool. But again, you know, React kind of changes every 2 years. So keep that in mind and always kind of, you know, stay up and studying your React there. Okay, so a little bit more into what's going on under the hood. How does React work? Why is it like, why do we keep saying React is like the best thing in the web since sliced bread? It's super fast. Why, how does this work? We all remember what the DOM is, from our past kind of lectures on, the document object model, the DOM, and how we can kind of manipulate the DOM using like JavaScript. The way React works is actually instead of making those changes directly to the DOM, it actually creates a virtual DOM, which basically is just a JavaScript object and just kind of replicates everything that happens on your current real DOM. And whenever you make changes in your React code, it actually makes changes inside of the virtual DOM over the real DOM, which is way faster to do than actually going in and manipulating the actual like DOM, which is computationally expensive. Like you can kind of like bring down performance of your site, slow it down by changing the DOM that way. But basically, what React does is it changes the virtual DOM and then checks for the difference using diffing, very much how like GitHub kind of would just kind of find the differences in your code for like your git add and commit and stuff like that. It uses diffing to actually just see what elements really need to be changed and then changes just those things over having to change the whole DOM. So what's cool is, it uses this whole virtual idea of like changing your UI and makes it extra fast because it's really just changing it in a simulation first and then basically seeing what are the small things that really need to be changed. So, a little intro into the virtual DOM is a little bit of what I kind of mentioned there. The idea is, React utilizes this concept of like an in-memory representation of the document object model. So, um, when we define this like render function in React, we're actually creating that virtual DOM that's not really the DOM, and any state changes. So the way we actually change like our UI in React is using state. We actually change state to actually change the DOM. What React does is actually reflects that virtual change in the virtual DOM. There is basically a there's a DOM, your a previous virtual DOM and your current DOM, and it actually just kind of sees the difference that way. And from there, it actually just sees what the difference is, takes that, and then changes your real DOM with it. So you can kind of think of this as, with Bob Ross, you are, when if y'all are all familiar with Bob Ross, I forget y'all are youngins out here, but he used to be this really great painter on PBS. But when he would paint a tree on his on his canvas, he wouldn't necessarily like be like, hey, I want to paint a tree, so I have to like throw out the canvas, bring in a new canvas and paint the tree on there. He kind of takes a look at the current canvas, paints the tree on there, and is like, all right, like that, call it a day. You're with the virtual DOM, you're actually kind of just making small changes instead of re-rendering the whole DOM, which is a lot of what you would do in previous frameworks and like before React was a thing. So again, let's go into diffing. React, really detects the changes with this whole diffing process. It kind of involves comparing a previous virtual DOM with the new virtual DOM, kind of like what I mentioned there. The idea is, once once you make a change with to the state of your app using your state, basically what it will do is actually it will actually have a previous kind of virtual rendition of your DOM. and a new virtual DOM that identifies the differences between there. And then basically it determines the exact location and nature of those changes from both of those that previous virtual DOM and the new virtual DOM. And once it understands those differences, it pulls the whole Bob Ross and paints the difference on the actual DOM and calls it a day. So again, manipulating the actual DOM directly is an expensive, performance heavy thing. React kind of gives you the ability to kind of just do it in a virtual setting and then basically takes the diffs through diffing and actually just changes like the core pieces that really need to be changed. So another cool thing about React is like remember how composable it is. There are these little component building blocks. Like when you make a state change on a particular component, that one component really is going to be the thing updating, and it's not really going to be the whole overarching app unless you want the whole overarching app to change. Okay. So again, we are kind of I kept yakking about JSX. React uses this special syntax called JSX, which is like a language written, by Facebook that simplifies the amount of code you need to write, like within your application. Again, think of this as, you using Spanglish where it's a little bit of HTML, a little bit of JavaScript kind of merged together so you can kind of write whatever the heck you want on there. So here's a cool example. Let's go. And again, it's similar to XML, which is kind of like another way, like, it's kind of like another HTML like structure. A lot of times that was used on the web and other platforms, like, I think like Android SDKs still use like an Android XML file, manifest XML file and stuff like that. But long story short, it was kind of used to represent like your HTML in a different way, but like it like the syntax of JSX is like kind of like this XML like structure that mixes, like your HTML and JavaScript. So let me show you what that means. So let's go back to our little hello world page. And I'm going to go into our little div here. So remember, this isn't just fully HTML here. This is JSX. So what I can actually do in JSX is actually use this bracket notation to actually represent JavaScript inside of my HTML here. So let's say if I have a variable called const, well, let's say it's let for now because I might change it. Let number one equal what do we got? 15. We got a number, it's 15 here. And we have another number. Oh, let's see what your problem is. Oh, it's just a lint issue. All right. And we'll have another one. Let number 2 equal 27. And what I want to do is what's cool, is like in this little bracket here, which is kind of like saying like, hey, I'm about to write JavaScript, just so you know, JSX is kind of like the way you kind of represent that. You can just kind of run JavaScript inside of your HTML here. So I'm going to add number 1 and number 2 together. Hello world. I'm going to just do a little dash here so you can kind of see it. So I have this div that says hello world dash this representation of JavaScript that just kind of lives within our div. And let's kind of see what happens here. As you can see, it says hello world dash 42. Just so you know, that's not a negative. I'm just going to put equals there so y'all aren't confused there. But basically, it's saying hello world number 1 plus number 2, which are two integers here, and then it just represents the value there. So let's say if I had something like let name equal Hess. You do something a little bit more realistic, like, hey, you're probably not going to want to add numbers to your inside of like your initial div, but what you probably want to do is say hello world, username, and then you can kind of take a look and see like hello world Hess. It takes that variable, represents it in JSX there, and you can just run JavaScript kind of just off of the blue there. So what's also cool is, you can kind of do stuff like let's add number nums, and it's gonna be equal to that arrow here. And as you can see, it's gonna add, let's actually do that same thing we did here, like add number 1 plus number 2, and we're gonna return this. So this is just gonna return this and this, turn 1 and 2. And what you can kind of do is you can basically run a function inside of your HTML here. So as you can see, it says 42 because we are basically calling this function here called add numbers, which is number 1 plus number 2 right inside of our JSX. So you're mixing HTML and JavaScript together, but you're also kind of like doing this to have this really cool dynamic UI based off of things you change in your browser. So let's say you had a button that add numbers, like then you can kind of go back here, have those numbers accumulate to something, and then represent them on your page this way. Pretty cool stuff when you think about it. Okay. So again, um, basically JSX again is not really readable by your browser, but you use, like there's this transpiler, like which is the same thing that transpiles like ES6, ES7, I believe is still one of the newer things that are out. I think ES8 as well, but like using that Babel library, it actually takes that code and kind of compiles it to a JavaScript that your browser would understand. This Babel tool is also transpiling your JSX code into JavaScript, which makes it readable to your browser. So again, that little JSX stuff that we did here, of like hello world, add numbers, all of that stuff here, or like hello world, let's go back to hello world name here. And if we go to our browser, hello world Hess, if we take a look, this is kind of an example of how this is written in JSX and how it's actually kind of like written without JSX. And like this is kind of what Babel is really kind of doing under the hood. It's taking the JSX code here, and like so if I were to kind of do the same div here, it would be like class name foo. And if we save that, you'll see that we were to inspect this element, it will have the class name of foo here. Open up our little browser there. As you can see, class name of foo. Now let's get all of this nonsense out of the way. This down here. Ooh, that's too much, but we see there is this class of foo. It says hello world Hess. Y'all can see that okay? Cool. So what I want to point out is what that's really transpiling down to outside of JSX is it's kind of like doing this structure here. If you see, like it says render, it's returning that React component where it's saying like, hey, I want you to create an element that has a div inside of an object. I want you to know it has a class name of foo. One of the text properties is hello, and the other text property is this.props.name. For us, it's just name because we don't need to pass down the props for that. We'll go into props a little later. But what's cool about that is, bam, this is what we would have to write without Babel. This is what we now write with Babel because we have the access, we have the ability to use JSX. All of this is just really just kind of making writing our application easier. So we really focus on the tough problems of figuring out how to build our app compared to how we can just kind of render one thing or scaffold a project from scratch to our page. So yeah, React can render HTML tags as you saw and React components as you can as you see from below. Um, like here's the rule of thumb about this. HTML tags are always going to be lowercase. So as you can see, our div, and you can see it on our page here, our divs are going to be lowercase, but like our React components are going to be uppercase. So we're actually in our main JS here, we're using React, we're using app here via via React. But our divs here, let's say if we had something like an H1, just say H1 here, bam. I'm just gonna put my name here again. Bam. And you see, it's using where we have this H1 here. That is going to follow the same rules of basically using our HTML, which is all lowercase. H1 is lowercase, divs are lowercase, but our React components are kind of capital case. It's like my component, and we have our class name of foo, which says hello world. And here's another interesting thing you probably saw. Most of the time we use class, to kind of identify the class of our divs. But in React, as you saw, I use this this little thing here called class name. So the reason for that is remember we are still kind of in JavaScript land, and the identifiers such as class and for are basically attribute names for XML. So those are already reserved words. So we actually have to so basically the authors of React were like, hey, how do we do this? Basically, instead we use the React DOM components, which kind of break down into like class and for. So we basically use these new properties called class name and HTML4 respectively in order to kind of replace what we have lost in just kind of like our XML attribute names there. So here's the real talk. In React, I use class name like a lot, but I have really never used HTML4. So, real talk, if understand both of these, but like 99% of the time, you're really going to be using class names. You're not going to really have to worry about HTML4, but, understand you will, if you ever have to use a for, this is how you use it. Okay, last JSX slide, I promise. Again, we can use these brackets to these curly braces here in JSX, like our JavaScript expressions are used that way. So again, as you saw, um, inside of here, we have these bracket notations are kind of basically telling our browser, yo, we're about to like do some JavaScript stuff. So just watch out for that. Basically, that's basically what we're trying that's what like we are saying with those curly braces there. So if you see here in our example, we have name. Let's say if I were to add nums here again, these curly braces basically tell React like, yo, in our JSX, we're about to do some JavaScript. So keep that in mind. We're like and handle our representation of that accordingly. So, we go to our browser here. Hello, Hess. We got 42 because we executed some JavaScript there. So if you see, let's say if we do something like 2 plus 2 here, 2 plus 2, we will get a humongous 4 because this is JavaScript inside of here, JavaScript execution. And JavaScript execution, we're referencing a variable name that we've declared earlier. And again, we can write our JavaScript inside of our HTML in this kind of like chocolate mixed with peanut butter type of way. Okay, so let's get ready. What I want y'all to do, this is going to be our assignment for the rest of the day, is I want y'all to create a React app. And what I want y'all to do is basically create a React app that actually you kind of like you remove the scaffolding from basically your Vite app, and then you just kind of like build out. Let me show you what kind of happens in our in when you build out a Vite app. Let's go back to. I'm actually going to close this here. I'm actually going to CD out of here. Go back into our my first. Yep, no, that's not it. First lesson here, I'm gonna run our server and PM run dev. That load, let that refresh here. We take a look here. We're gonna have something similar to this. You're gonna have all of that extra text there when you create your React app using Vite. But if you see here, there's a little button that when you click on, it actually changes state and actually updates your UI with a counter. How's that working? Let me show you. Let's actually close the server, open up our code here. So again, you don't have to write a lot of this. What you're actually going to be doing is removing stuff, but within that first initial scaffold React app, you'll have like this concept of a button. And inside of the button, remember our event handlers in JavaScript. This is kind of the way we would handle this in React. We have an onClick event. And based off of that, we are actually running a function on here. Remember, if y'all were paying attention, I kind of mentioned that, React actually changes its state changes the whole UI based off of its state. So there's this concept of state. And basically, whenever a state is changed, that's what's going to cause a re-render of your React component, which kind of updates, in this case, a button. But for other things, it will be like for this guy over here, it's actually like I change the state and then I have a new gift every time I press a button. The state changes, your UI changes, and basically you kind of control your functionality based off of that. In the boilerplate example, you're going to actually see that you have a state called count. And this is going to be the function to actually change your state. Again, this is how you kind of create a state in React. We'll go over this next class a little bit more, but basically you have this whole const, you name what state you want. You actually follow this format of set, camel case, your actual state name. So it's set count for this case. And then you use this concept of useState. And within the parentheses here, you actually have its initial state. So basically, if I were to change this here to like 100, and we go back to our actual React app here, I'm going to refresh the browser here. I'm going to restart our server. There we go. It starts out at 100 now. And if I click on it, we go to 101, 102, 103, 104, 105. And that's because our initial state started at 100. So let's take a look at what's happening. So inside of our button here, we have the whole concept of, a type button, class name is counter. Those are all like the class name is really for styling. The type is really for a button. So you understand what type it is. But the real meat and potatoes that I want you to kind of take a look at is our onClick on line 19 here. So again, onClick, we actually call this function. Remember, we do a callback whenever there, and this callback is actually setting state. So we're using that set count that we declared on line 8, which basically is the way we update the state in our React app. So it's saying basically set count. We have our count. And in the function, what we really want to do is just add 1 to that count. So on click, the count should be updated to 1 by 1. So you click on it, and then the whole component updates. What's different? The count is different. So if you take a look inside of here, there is like the count is count. What you're really doing is when you change the state here, you're actually causing a re-render of this React component, and then it checks to see what the difference is. And the only thing that's different is the count variable, which is now higher. It's one plus the current count. So that count is changed in our component, and that's it. So here's what I want y'all to do. You are going to create your first React app using Vite, and basically all you're going to do is use that same button logic, and I want you to up to like 12 or like up to 15. I want you to just basically check like, hey, if your number is divisible by 3, change the color of your button. And basically that's the whole lab for today. So you're going to learn how to scaffold your app up, have it running. And then I just want you to basically every time you just check count, check to see if it's divisible by 3. If you've done FizzBuzz, you basically just recreate the logic of FizzBuzz. You should have finished FizzBuzz from your last couple of labs, but just take that. And if the colors, if it's divisible by 3, change it to any other color you want. And that's it. All right. Any questions before I break y'all into groups? No? All right. getting y'all in the groups now. We only have like 15 minutes, so I'm gonna grab y'all in about 10 minutes, 15, I'll grab y'all in like 12 minutes so you have a little bit of time. But um that's it. Then class and Bob's your uncle. Also think about who you want to be working with in your groups for your capstones, okay? The rooms are open. See y'all in a little bit. Wait like 30 seconds for everyone else to trickle back in. So again, I don't know if it was a little confusing on what needed to be done, but basically all I wanted y'all to do was just use that Vite command to like create your React app. From that particular command, you would have basically everything you needed with the button and the scaffolding, and then just like from there you start playing around with whether the number is divisible by 3. So the biggest thing I wanted y'all to do really is just kind of get comfortable with creating a React app with Vite. So let me just kind of walk y'all through that again, because like this will be on this is what y'all will more likely be using for your capstone project. But let's go back to our browser here. I have included this documentation inside of our our channel in Slack. So in cohort 2, you should see a getting started with Vite. What I want y'all to do is really just, take this command, npm create Vite at latest. You're going to be prompted with a bunch of questions like what we had before. So let me actually just kind of quit this just to show y'all one more time.
Further, we can
Can you
see.
share your screen?
Oh, yeah, my bad. Thank you for sharing that. I would have created the whole thing without y'all seeing anything. All right, so again, really what I want y'all to do is just in a new folder, whatever folder you have, just copy this command here. I'll even put this in our chat here, make it a little easier for you guys. Bam. Create our Vite app here. All right, project name. I'm gonna just call it demo dash app. Where what we're gonna do is we're gonna select React. Bam. We are gonna select JavaScript and just JavaScript. We don't need the other stuff right now. Hit enter. You want me to run npm run and start. So it's going to do all of that for us. Now we got our little server running right here on localhost 5173. Let's go back to our localhost 5173. And if you see, this is what y'all should really see right now. What I want y'all to do again is, if you click on this button here, once you hit 3, this button, like what you can do is like either you change the color inside of the button or you change something else inside of like your React app to signify like, hey, I now know this is divisible by 3, so something else should change. It can be the text here, it can be the button. It's up to you, but I want you to kind of understand how you can kind of use that same JavaScript that you have been playing around with in the labs and utilize this inside of your React app and see how lightning fast, things can change based off of whatever you write. So, one small thing I want y'all to leave y'all on is, as I mentioned before, React is a UI library. So what you can do with this is a plentiful amount of things. So You can build out mobile apps, but also there are all other experimental tech that like React 360. And basically what I did was built this whole application using the same React that y'all will be learning. So when you think about how like the state changes off of button pressing here, basically what is changing here is on a button press, I'm actually changing the state of our whole current environment. So if I were to click on this button here, that'll take us to inside of the cave. I simulate this idea of us moving to different areas because one of the things that's controlled by state is the actual 360 sphere of this whole React app here. So, you think you're moving around, but it's really the state is just changing based off of whichever button I press. So let's just quickly go into our little Poke Center and we'll end it here. So what I want to really convey is like this is the same React you'll be using to build out your projects, your capstone projects. This is what you'll be learning. And when you get good enough at it, you can build whatever the heck you want. Like I decided to basically hire like a 360 artist to basically just make a bunch of my favorite Pokemon around the whole sphere here, and made 3 locations and just kind of put them together in a React app by just kind of setting up this same paradigms that we'll be learning. Okay. So what will you build? On that note, get the heck out of here. I'll see y'all on Thursday. Deuces.
Thank
Deuces.
you, Professor.
Yeah.
Professor.
Bye.
Have a good day.
Take it
Bye,
easy, guys.
Professor.
All right. All right. All right. Thanks again for helping. Again, Shahid. Yeah, so
Channel about. Oh, it just turned off.
oh yeah, my bad. I
Yeah.
turned it off too.
Yeah.
Bye everybody.